Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Karatina Wash Process Kenya from Apollon's Gold. And there's the bag right there. And Apollon's Gold, based out of Tokyo, Japan. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions over the years. And in our most recent Apollon's Gold review, I mentioned that we picked up a second bag of coffee from them while we were out in Tokyo, and that is this Kenya right here, as it was also suggested to us by the owner of Apollon's Gold. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 68. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Apollon's Gold's recipe, which is a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as we alluded to in our previous Apollon's Gold review, they don't roast quite as light as what they once used to, as this coffee right here definitely still feels very light, but maybe not to the extent of some of the previous coffees we've had from them. So that's to say that this is still a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 48, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and there was an abundance of classic Kenyan characteristics to the cup, with plenty of the dark tart berry characteristics and a nice candied aspect to them. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but the cup did feel a little cleaner, well defined, with notably less of the savory aspects to them. A little bit of a thicker body with plenty of brightness, sweetness, and a complementary herbal aspect. So for the most part, what you were expecting from a Kenyan coffee, but in a very nice sense. Day 51, opted for the Chemex, and it was a pretty similar cup to the first impression, as there was a notable candied sweetness, matching the Kenyan-like aspects of the cup. Plenty of body and cleanliness with a slight bit of a savory and earthy aspect in line with the listed. Our notes are actually cut off right there. Listed tea. All right. Day 53, opted for the April brewer, and the cup was drastically different, as this one focused a little bit more on the herbal and savory bitterness of the cup itself, as there was notably less sweetness to the cup and an even brightness, as it skewed a little bit more in an earthy berry sense. So for this reason, it wasn't necessarily my favorite through this brew method. Not quite as good. We continue on to day 56, and we opted for the V60 with Apollon's Gold's recipe, and this is by far the best it had been up to this point. And that's what I noticed from the two coffees that we'd reviewed from them. The recipe that they were opting for with their coffees really seemed to offer a lot of success with our experiences, as it had excellent sweetness and terrific definition, especially to the berry components, which all felt very well articulated. All of the listed notes are present and prominent, as there are much more of the earthy tea-like aspects to the cup, a well-defined florality, and a slightly jammy stone fruit aspect. So an excellent cup all around, a very impressive day. Day 60 opted for the Chemex with Apollon's Gold's recipe, and the cup continues to offer a borderline error-proof cup, as it offers great sweetness, especially in the dark berry sense. Still a slightly heavier body with a lingering Kenyan-like savoriness, but for the most part, a great day. And on day 64, back through the V60 with Apollon's Gold's recipe. This is the most notes I have for a single day, as it continues to impress with an extremely well-defined and clean Kenyan coffee, one of the cleanest Kenyan coffees that we've ever reviewed, as it does emphasize a lot of the fruit-forward components to it with an almost blackberry-like jello sweetness, as well as a well-pronounced apricot-like component to it as well. Floral aspects are a bit secondary on this day, but also quite well articulated, with the savoriness significantly toned down, and this was the best day of the coffee we had experienced up to this point. Here on day 68, continues to improve, as I continue to be impressed by the way that this coffee is turning out. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so we will actually start with the finish level 4. I rarely have too much to say when it comes to Kenyan coffees and the finish, because typically you're going to experience level 4. It'd be extremely rare for them to go any lower than that, and unless they have a super long-lasting aspect to them, then they're usually going to finish at that level 4 mark. So level 4 seems perfect for it. Sweetness, level 4. yes, and if anything, I do have to say it's on the higher side of the level 4, as this turned out to be a very sweet Kenyan coffee, much higher than I think I was expecting from it. So terrific in that regard. One of my favorite parts of this coffee. Acidity, level 4. And I mentioned in our Jansen review that we were making these tasting wheels side by side, the Panamanian Geisha and this Kenyan. And that's why that one was that level 3, because this one definitely had a fair bit more brightness to it. So level 4 definitely seems justified. But once again, if a Kenyan coffee isn't scoring a level 4 in the finish and a level 4 in the acidity, then it doesn't really offer the Kenyan-like attributes to it. I don't really know what to say on that. But yes, level 4 for the acidity on this one. Plurality, level 4, classic in the regard that it has that red floral-like aspect to it. It's very reminiscent of hibiscus for me. It's something that I continue to see in so many Kenyan coffees in general. So level 4 seems quite well fitting for this coffee. Berry fruit, level 4. And I did specifically pick out a blackberry, as it did have that darker tart berry aspect to it. And that's, of course, going to be another theme from Kenyan coffees, but it felt extremely well defined in that regard. So that's definitely one of the more enjoyable parts about this coffee. I do like that in Kenyan coffees. I just feel like maybe at times it's kind of contrasted a little too much by a little too much brightness as well as too much savoriness. So when I'm experiencing that maybe in a little bit more isolated of a manner, then I definitely enjoy it a little bit more. Stone fruit, level 4. Honestly, that has to be one of the most surprising parts of this coffee, as typically I see the stone fruit indicator on a lot of these Kenyan coffees, but rarely do I experience it in such well-defined of a manner as this one was right here, as this one had so much stone fruit sweetness to it, and it was present, prominent, and defined to the extent where it justified that level 4 mark in equal measure to the berry fruit. So massive credit to them on that. We'll go through the one level 3, and that is the caramel at that level 3, and that definitely just insinuates the candied-like aspect to it, as I briefly mentioned it on the first day, and it was present throughout, as this coffee just did have a nice candied sweetness to it, and that's another really nice selling point to me on Kenyan coffees when they have that slightly candied aspect to them. I briefly described this one as being jello-like, and it's because it did have so much sugary aspects to it, so credit to them once again on that. And then I think the one thing that, actually the citrus fruit also scores at that level 3 mark. So that's also a really nice part of this coffee for me, because oftentimes I do find that Kenyan coffees might have that citrus that kind of goes right there with the berry fruit, and then you're getting a lot of tart citrus, and it's like not necessarily ideal. So having this one toned down a little bit did seem to help this coffee for me anyway. And then, yeah, kind of looking at it, that's the one I keep having to go back to. There are still a couple of things I need to discuss. We'll start with the savoriness level 2. That's a huge selling point to me on this one. Anytime you're able to tone down those tomato-like aspects of a Kenyan coffee, then that's going to be an instant winner for me, as this one hardly had any of those savory aspects to it. If anything, the savoriness is a little bit more reminiscent of the earthy tea-like aspects, but even then, towards the end, it was significantly less abundant relative to a lot of the other things that were present within this coffee. So level 2 seems pretty fitting for that. The other one is the body at level 2, and I remember when I was making this tasting, when I said, I've noted just how kind of juicy, thick the body has been right at the start. Why is it that when I'm making this tasting wheel and on this day, the coffee just feels a little lighter body than some of the previous experiences? And I think maybe the only thing I could come up with is that we started the coffee at our standard recipe, which is a little bit more concentrated, and then towards the end, it's a little bit more diluted of a recipe, which is Apollon's Gold's recipe. So I think that's kind of the best reasoning I can come up with. But level 2, honestly, as I'm drinking it here on day 68 and when I had it on day 64, it just felt like it was a little bit closer to that level 2 than that level 3. So interesting for me in that sense. Final thing worth discussing is the cleanliness at a level 4, and I did hold off on discussing that one until last because I was really impressed by just how much clarity there was from this one. I think I would really have to kind of go back and try to figure out if there's been a Kenyan coffee that I've had just as clean as this one. I think the first one that comes to mind is maybe the Kianjege from Manhattan a couple of years ago, but this one right here was one of the cleanest Kenyan coffees I've ever had, and maybe the cleanest Kenyan coffee that I've ever had. So that's massive credit to Apollon's Gold for that, as I could say that it's actually on the higher side of level 4, which is extremely rare for me when it comes to Kenyan coffees. So that's going to be the best part of this coffee. But as I'm looking at the tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I do think it's a little unfortunate that I could not fit this coffee into our 2023 reviews, because I feel like it stood a very good chance of ending up in our top 10 coffees of the year list, mostly because this might have been my second favorite washed Kenyan coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel, as it's right up there with the Kian Jege, and it's for very different reasons too, and that's the part I think I find most interesting. It's a classic Kenya, however, it's such a nicely done classic Kenya in the sense that it tones down the things that I don't necessarily love about classic Kenyans, most specifically that savory aspect to it, but it's offering such great definition to a lot of the other components that it really seems to accentuate the best that you can experience from a wash processed Kenyan coffee, at least for me. And for that reason, I was thoroughly impressed by this coffee right from start to finish, and it continues to go along the lines of my experiences with this coffee roaster. As I've mentioned, that our recent reviews from them and my recent experiences with them have been extremely positive, to the point where they are becoming one of my favorite coffee roasters in the entire world. The Kenyan coffee that I had from them at their roastery was extremely impressive, and this one right here also continued to live up to those expectations, as this one was also extremely impressive. And it's extremely early in the year. I'm actually still recording this one in 2023, but I do know that this one already stands a chance of ending up in our top 10 coffees of 2024 list. So that's massive credit to Apollon's Gold for yet another really impressive coffee. Type of person I would suggest this one to is somebody that does enjoy their classic Kenyan coffees, but maybe in a little bit more of the sense that I enjoy, and that's specifically focusing on the clarity, the sweetness, the fruit aspects of it, and significantly less of the savory components, because this one is a classic Kenya. It offers all of those things. When you think of classic Kenyan coffees, this one has those in abundance, while still offering some additional things, including that interesting stone fruit-like aspect to it, and a nice kind of savory tea-like component as well. So that one gives it some really nice depth, and it tones down the savoriness, which is a huge sticking point to me, and I feel like should be for a lot of other people, even though I know some people enjoy them. But keep that classic Kenyan profile in mind, as it offered a lot of those things, but in a very well-defined manner. And I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Karatina wash processed Kenya from Apollon's Gold. Thank you for watching.